Russia continues to bombard Ukraine's infrastructure with shelling. Of course, the White House is accusing North Korea of sending a serious level of artillery shells to Russia under the guise of those shipments going to the Middle East and to North Africa. Well, that revelation coming as North Korea continues to step up its aggression in their own region. Today, they launched at this point, 4 more missiles, including an intercontinental ballistic missile, which fell into the Sea of Japan and also triggered alerts there in Japan. On Wednesday, North Korea fired off 23 missiles. That was the most ever in a single day. They say the launches are in response to the large-scale joint military drills being held by the U.S. and South Korea this week.
In response, the U.S. and South Korea have decided to extend those military drills indefinitely.
Joining us now from our nation's capital to get some more insight on North Korea's actions and the impact on the war in Ukraine is John Kirby, the coordinator for strategic communications for the National Security Council and a 28-year veteran of the U.S. Navy. Mr. Kirby, thanks so much for giving us some time. We appreciate it. Good morning to you.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
On these 2 North Korea headlines, I just wonder which one you feel is more urgent in terms of what you want the public to know, the fact that they are supplying, or U.S. believes they're supplying through interesting means, weapons to Russia, or these ongoing missile launches. What's your read on both? What is North Korea up to right now?
I mean, I think just looking at both those stories, it's very plain to see that Pyongyang intends to continue to try to destabilize the region and now perhaps even the international environment, certainly over in Europe. And that's deeply concerning to us. Their willingness to continue to support Russia as they continue to kill innocent Ukrainian people, and of course their willingness to continue to destabilize the peninsula and the region with these missile launches and all these other provocative actions. That's why we're going to work with our partners at the UN and certainly across Europe inside NATO, and that's also why we're going to make sure that our military is ready to support our alliance commitments in the region, both to Japan and to South Korea.
So speaking of that, speaking more about these covert shipments, the reports of the covert shipments from North Korea to Russia. Can you tell us more how the U.S. or other countries can try and stop that, or if anything's being done?
Well, we are working with allies and partners to see what our options are here, most specifically through the UN. I don't have any specific remedies to talk to today, but we are working closely with allies and partners, again, largely through the UN to see what some of our options might be. These shipments, and again, we haven't seen indications that they've been received, just that they are being covertly supplied. But this is just another example of a couple of things. How more isolated countries like North Korea and Iran, who is also providing drones to Russia, are from the international community. And it's also a sign of just how desperate Mr. Putin is. I mean, his defense industrial base cannot keep up with the expenditure of weapons and ammunition in Ukraine, and so he is reaching out now to other countries to try to get support.
And that is such a critical point, because that does underscore the narrative of the last several months, that what we've learned is that the Russian military is not quite as mighty as people once thought. And if you're turning to rogue countries now for your covert supply of weapons, that is very telling. So thank you for making that point. But of course, when it comes to Russia and weapons, there's been a lot of talk, as you well know, and a lot of concern about nuclear weapons. There was a reporting earlier this week that there were legitimate discussions amongst Russian generals about using nukes, but then Russia seemed to soften its language in a statement just yesterday, saying a nuclear war cannot be won and should not be fought. Mixed signals here. What do you think is really going on? Which should we believe?
Well, this is one thing that we can absolutely agree with the Russians on in terms of the futility of nuclear war. So we agree with that statement, and we hope that they're taking that to heart, and it's not just some talking point they're throwing out there. But again, it's irresponsible and reckless for Mr. Putin, who has been almost since the beginning of this war talking about the potential use of weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine and nuclear weapons specifically. We have to take that seriously. It would be irresponsible for us not to. So we're watching this as best we can. I won't speak to the particulars of the reporting in the New York Times on this, but we're watching this as best we can. What I can tell you is that as of today, we still see no signs that the Russian military is making preparations for the use of these kinds of weapons. And again, if they really believe what they said, then that's a good thing, and we hope they hold to that.
So as we were discussing, North Korea fired 23 ballistic missiles yesterday. You said yet today we're up to 4. In one case, landing the closest to South Korean waters since the countries were divided in 1945. Just kind of what is the thought behind all this? Is Kim Jong-un showing off, or is the country's aggression leading up to a major conflict? And that being said, South Korea responding by launching their own missiles in the same border area. Was that a wise move in turn?
Well, I think, look, for one thing, you ask what Mr. Kim's doing. It's hard to get inside his brain and know exactly what his intentions are. Clearly, he continues to try to advance his ballistic missile program. So whether these are shows of force or whether he's trying to send some sort of message to the world, I'll let him speak to that. But what we know is every time he does one of these launches or several launches, whether they're successful or they fail, he learns. And his program grows and develops. And that's not good for anybody on the peninsula. It's certainly not good for anybody in the region, which is why, again, we're going to work with international partners to see what additional accountability measures we can put in place. And it's why we're going to make sure that we have the appropriate military readiness on the peninsula to defend our South Korean allies as well as our Japanese allies. We're doing exercises with the Japanese as well, and we're working on trilateral cooperation. But all of these launches are destabilizing and potentially dangerous. And certainly the South Koreans have a natural right and a responsibility to be able to defend themselves. And so as they conduct launches, they are trying to make sure that they have appropriate defensive capabilities in place to defend the South Korean people. But they ought to know, and we've made it very clear to them, that this is a linchpin treaty alliance that we have in the region. We take that seriously. We're going to make sure that our troops are, as they say, ready to fight tonight if it comes to that.
Mr. Kirby, I'm going to change the tone just a little bit to get back to a domestic issue before we let you go. You've devoted much of your life to public service as national security, as your involvement in national security issues, and your role in this administration. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or concerns or warnings about next week and what's swirling in our country related to the midterms and security threats of violence, the attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband. I'm just wondering what your takeaway is or what your concerns are now that we're just days away from what many expect to not only be a contested but potentially violent and litigious election season.
Well, again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the Pelosi family. Obviously, this was just a horrifying attack and so senseless, and sadly appears to speak to the hyper-polarization in American society today. But I can tell you, and President Biden has been very dedicated to making sure that election security is foremost and topmost in our minds and in the minds of local and state officials all around the country. And we're confident that Americans will be able to show up and cast their votes safely and securely, and in the comfort and the knowledge that this election will be free and fair, whatever the result might be. I mean, this is part of a democracy. This is part of citizenship. And it's something that I know the men and women in the military take very seriously. That's part of what they do, is to defend the rights of American citizens to participate in the electoral process and in our democracy. We're comfortable and confident that this election will be secure.
All right, John Kirby, thank you so much for your time and insights, sir. We always appreciate it. Please come back.
You bet.